next little bit.
Sounds good.
Live stream open too, so I can monitor the comments. So for people just joining us right now, whether it's on if it's on YouTube, yeah, we're about a few minutes out from Ben giving us his talk on NSERC policy analysis. So stick ahead, and yeah, we'll get going in just a minute. Just gonna pull up the live stream. I think I finally got access now. All right, so if anyone's joining us in the live stream, just to let you know, we're going to be starting up in a couple minutes. We're just going to give some more people some time to join in. If anyone has any questions at all throughout the live stream, feel free to comment them below. I'll be monitoring the live stream comments, so that way your question will get asked during the question period at the end. Okay, so we're coming up to about 3:34 right now. So why don't we get started? Yeah, I'll do a quick introduction for you, Ben, and then we are good to start. So, hello everyone, and welcome to this month's HQP seminar. Today we are joined by Davis-Purcell. So, Ben received his PhD from Carleton University in 2022, working on the Atlas experiment. Instead of continuing right to academia, he pursued an opportunity to work for the government of Canada through the Mitacs Canadian Science Policy Fellowship. With this fellowship, he was hired as a policy analyst at NSERC, where he worked for a year. In 2026, after returning to academia for a postdoc at TRIUMF, he was selected as a delegate for Science Meets Parliament BC, an opportunity that allowed him to further his science policy knowledge and meet with government officials to discuss science and policy. In this talk, Ben will provide an overview of science policy and policy for science and share how these topics affect all of us. He will also describe his experience on life as a policy analyst in the federal government, including important transferable skills that science and engineering graduate students acquire, and a week in the life of a policy analyst at NSERC. Without further ado, Ben, I give the mic to you. Welcome.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. Yeah, thanks for the intro. I guess I wrote much too long of a bio to be read on screen there. So thanks for getting through all that. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. And hopefully this is a a little bit different for some of you folks interested in policy and life working in government. So yeah, this is well, if you're not aware of the background image here, probably most people coming from at least in Ontario. I'm in Vancouver right now, but you hopefully recognize this as the Canadian, well, Parliament, federal Parliament building there in downtown Ottawa, where, well, didn't spend any time in that building, but my office was just down the road from there when I was living in Ottawa, working at NSERC. But let's jump into things and start off with my well, disclaimer. So this is basically just to say that everything in this talk is about my own experiences, my own explanations of various expert information, sometimes directly from the source, sometimes paraphrased. Anytime I'm using other material, you'll see links on the page or quotes from people. But yeah, please know this is my own, obviously biased perspective of everything I'm saying. And I'm not speaking on behalf of any government organization or any organization, just trying to provide information based on my own experiences that maybe is, if not useful, then interesting to say the least. So let's get into things. And since this is well, a bit of a more personal explanation, like I said, I figured I'd sort of give you a little bit of a path of how I got to, well, at least the policy position. So started off doing my undergrad in physics in the co-op program, which is important. At McMaster University. And so I was really lucky to take on a bunch of different co-op terms, all in physics research, spending a lot of time at Snow Lab, at TRIUMF and Jefferson Lab in the US. Did my thesis in theoretical particle physics with all of those research co-op experiences being mostly in experimental nuclear or particle physics. So got to spend time at Perimeter Institute during my honors thesis. I switched fields, did my master's in soft condensed matter, still physics, and then sort of wanted to change things up a bit, get some different experiences, which is a sort of common theme, why I'm doing this little intro. Worked as an instructor at McMaster for a year, basically also running the undergrad physics program there, working as the outreach coordinator, teaching physics courses. Then started my PhD at Carleton. I really wanted to seek out a position at CERN, and so got that with the Atlas experiment, which was awesome. Was able to relocate and spend a lot of time at CERN as well, and then had the cool opportunity to, well, work at NSERC, as you'll find out a little bit more of. And so instead of doing a postdoc or something like that. Yeah, well, I mean, sort of. My position was roughly called a fellow, sort of like a postdoctoral fellow, but yeah, working for the government, and then moved back to do a postdoc at TRIUMF on the Pioneer experiment, which I just completed. So a little bit of a windy road to get where I am, which has given me a lot of different experiences, which I'm able to talk a little bit about today. So starting off with how I got into working for the government, really focusing on, yeah, the later years of that timeline here. And so I was really lucky to get the Mitacs Canadian Science Policy Fellowship, being one of these fellows, which was a program that brings PhD level scientists, so people with PhDs in science fields, and really actually that included social science as well, into government policy positions. I'll touch on this later on, but normally it is a long, potentially complicated process to get a job directly working for the government. And so this program was awesome that it really just lets you bypass that into a mid-level position, skipping over the junior positions as well. Um, this fellowship had me working directly for, well, NSERC, which you'll see in a minute, but also the fellowship aspect meant that we had a cohort of everybody in this MyTax program, and included a whole bunch of workshops on training in policy, because a lot of people working for the government come from policy backgrounds. They went to school for poli-sci, maybe have masters in public policy, that sort of thing, masters in communications, that kind of those kinds of backgrounds. Less common to have science backgrounds, except at NSERC, I will say. And so we were given a lot of these training workshops on various topics in policy, which is where I've gotten some of this material that I'm showing you today as well. This was an interesting program in that it's quite a long process. So started basically in a year where you would start your job in September, you apply all the way back in November, and it's a dual application in that you apply as the individual wanting to get into this program, and then the hosts or people who are going to be, or agencies or departments in government who are going to be hosting these fellows who want these highly trained, well, HQPs to come into the government, also put in applications, and they post a bunch of jobs they think would be relevant for people with these science skills. And then it's a two-way match. You could get accepted into this fellowship program and never end up getting a job in the end if you didn't find a match. So then you end up getting matched with a potential government organization, well, department or agency specifically. You could have 0 to 5 matches. And so then you sort of do an interview process. I'll say, well, a little bit more about that, but yeah, this program, I'll stop talking about how this program actually worked because unfortunately it's been discontinued very sadly. I happen to be in the last cohorts. Hopefully something like this gets brought back again by Mitacs. And yeah, I believe it was, well, as always, funding issues for why this specific program was discontinued. There's a really interesting article, though, that I recommend that if you Google engaging scientists in science policy experiences from Canada, you can find out about some experiences written by some science policy fellows from my time on the availability of fellowships like this. The long story short, there's a whole bunch of them in the US, but Canada is lacking a bit on some of these opportunities, and they are very good. So hopefully something like this gets brought back soon. Um, More about my experiences. So I got asked to interview with 4 different departments or agencies. Departments and agencies are sort of the 2 areas you can work in governments. Departments means you have a minister, a federal minister that you are directly reporting to. Also, I should say when I'm talking about government here, for now at least, I mean federal government. So departments, you're directly reporting to a minister. So the minister of let's say finance, for example, or the Minister of Innovation, Science, and Economic Development, which would be a common one. Well, the minister overseeing all of science right now. We used to have a minister for science. Unfortunately, that position was removed, yeah, 8 or so years ago. Agencies do not have a direct minister overseeing them. They report to departments. They're sort of like little subsets. So NSERC is technically an agency that sort of reports to ISED, Innovation, Science, and Economic Development, but it does not have a minister directly overseeing it. Anyways, technicality, I interviewed for Environment Climate Change Canada, this Canada Revenue Agency, Defense Research and Development Canada, and then NSERC. And it's very interesting because you're sort of interviewing each other. I know I've already been accepted into the program, and I basically am expecting to get, well, because these people are interviewing me, they already sort of want to hire me. So now I'm trying to rank each of these interviews and choose who I want to work with. And basically, naturally, it was most interesting for me to work with NSERC, and they liked me as well. All of these interviews, I will say, pointed out items on my CV as to why they wanted to interview me, and none of them pointed out anything about any of my research experiences. They're like, oh, PhD, cool. We know this person can do research. Each of them picked out one or more specific non-research components of my CV, like my science communication activities I've done in the past, committees I've been on, leadership experiences, working in collaborations of various sizes. Those were all the important things that really got me highlighted. So those aspects are critical for opportunities outside of academia, at least government opportunities. Okay, enough about that little background. Let's get into a super brief science policy 101. So, what does it mean to be a policy analyst? My position at NSERC was policy analyst. So, you're doing what is best for the public, for your organization, not you, is the point. If you work for the federal government, you are called a public servant. If you've heard that phrase thrown around, that's basically just means you work for the federal government in public policy. This is separate from being a politician. That is, these two are totally separate. Federal government public servants are completely non-partisan in the work, whereas if you are a political official, a politician, somebody who's a representative of a constituency who you voted in, and then the team of people working for them, they are by definition partisan. So that does not mean that partisan decisions, the decisions made by whatever party is in power, doesn't influence your work in terms of the mission of your organization. You could very easily be doing something that is, maybe one example is like working on alcohol policy and trying to make recommendations for the public. Well, one government may have one priority on this, and then you might have been working on a policy for a year, getting ready to release it, and then a new government could come in and cut that all together, and then all that work is just the public will never see anything like that because the priorities were switched by the government, and you have to do the work as you are instructed by your organization, which again, nonpartisan, but influenced by who's in power. So what is public policy? Well, here's a direct quote here. Basically, well, like I was just saying in my own words, the articulation of a government priority, strategy, or objective. A set of directions is really a key point here to try and guide these outcomes that will affect the public. Stakeholders is another very critical aspect to policy. And so maybe if we can play a little game here. Maybe if I can get your help, Ryan, I want to ask you if you take 30 seconds to think about if the McDonald Institute, for example, is creating a new 5-year plan, who are the stakeholders? So if you want to throw into chat, any group or single person, maybe whatever you think might be a stakeholder. If there's anything that you're thinking about, there's no wrong answers. This is often the first thing that is done whenever a new plan is being made. And yeah, so what do you think? Maybe Ryan, if if there's anything, if any random guesses or suggestions coming in, you might be able to read a couple of those out.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I'll start while I monitor things on YouTube. But would like a PI a stakeholder?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, that's a great one. Certainly anybody who, well, a PI related to McDonald Institute, anybody who's going to be getting funding or has their research directly associated with McDonald Institute, absolutely they count as a stakeholder. Um, Anything else that's
Yeah, we got someone said VPRs. I'm not actually familiar with what a VPR is. Do you?
That'd be Vice President Research
Ah, got it.
from a university is what that acronym tends to stand for. And yeah, absolutely. So university partners, VPRs would be often the ones dealing directly with organizations like the McDonald Institute. Absolutely. So people external to McDonald Institute, like university partners, are absolutely still stakeholders. Is there
Awesome.
maybe
We also have a
if
few
there's one
more.
more coming in? Yeah, yeah, a couple. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah, yeah. So we got taxpayers.
Absolutely. Yes, that would be what I'll classify as the general public. Yes. McDonald Institute is funded by, well, public funding in absolutely some way. So the general public is absolutely a stakeholder. Yeah, great one. All right, well, we'll cut it off there. I'll show you my sort of non-exhaustive list. So obviously the clear ones, employees, partners. This is the exercise you have to do whenever you're trying to think of a new policy or even start brainstorming a new policy. You have to, well, think of who it's going to affect. And really, I mean, that can be everybody, governments and funding agencies, affiliated researchers, interested potential researchers who may have contacted people associated with MI or haven't even contacted them yet. K to 12 teachers and students, because MI is running programs for education at the K to 12 level. Potential technical affiliates like engineers. The whole international astroparticle physics community is going to be in some way influenced by what an important organization like MI comes up with. And of course, the general public. And this is absolutely not exhaustive because I'm sure you can think of even more. Stakeholder engagement is absolutely critical. And so is ordering your stakeholders in this stakeholder matrix. So once you've got your big list of stakeholders, then how stakeholders influence your policy comes down to where they fit in this stakeholder matrix. And this comes down to power and interest. So high power, high interest are going to be the most important people. Low power, low interest. In some cases, this is why I will say that advocating, rallying for things can be very important because the general public often can initially get put in this low power, low interest, unfairly, unfortunately, but an individual person, a single vote, does not have that much power. Getting a large group of people together and going and coming up, organizing in person, organizing online, sending a whole bunch of letters to your representatives. That is how you can move this sort of seeming low power, low interest, even low power, high interest into the high power, high interest stage. And that's when you've maybe noticed things change in terms of policy once we get to larger organizations of people. Okay, so what does it mean? What does even science policy mean? Starting off with, well, two ways to define this. We've got policy for science, which is policies that are related to the management and support of a nation's scientific enterprise. Um, for example, this would be like similar to health policy, foreign policy, that kind of thing. There's also science for policy, which would be how is science evidence and data used to inform public policy that is not necessarily science. So there's how is science done, and then science influencing other policies. So like a direct application of science for policy would have been research showing that COVID vaccines slow the spread of the virus, and so we can keep people out of hospitals if we make mandatory vaccination policies. There's two separate cultures in science and policy. This is not done by me. I give credits to Jeff Kinder, as you've seen his name come up from the Institute on Governance here. So I'd like to go through some of these because I do think it is a good representation. So in science, we've got often very long time horizons, as I'm sure many of you are aware with the long time scales of large detector particle physics experiments or telescope observations, that sort of thing. And policy turnaround can often be very short. However, I will sort of throw in my own caveat that even though there are often long time scales, we know in science, at least for me, it can often be very high stress, even though the time scales are long until it's not. And for policy, I will say it's often low stress until it's not. So yeah, a little bit of my own, again, that's my own personal addition. In terms of language, science, we have to be precise. Policy, flexible language, as you probably note hearing politicians speak. There's absolutely jargon, be it scientific or political, in both. In science, this is a cool one. I mean, uncertainty in science is important. We have error bars. We want uncertainty. That is what breeds new discoveries. But uncertainty in policy leads to discomfort. They try and avoid all sorts of uncertainty. The peers are generally, well, audiences generally are peers in science compared to public. In policy, there's a lot of hierarchy in policy, vertical accountability, whereas a lot of peer accountability in science. Policy likes generalists, whereas science is more so specialists. However, interdisciplinary science is also very good, so I don't want to lock that in. Science should hopefully be open in terms of transparency. Policy is often closed, unfortunately. Location for science is everywhere. For federal government, the location is really the national capital region. Policy briefings are another interesting thing. So this is where you have a sort of pitch that is summarizing months to even years of work that gets presented to higher up decision makers a lot of the time. And they can be oral most of the time, written though. An effective policy brief is really an act of science communication. You've probably seen phrases like this before. So, specifically to build a briefing note, though, you'd write an issue, have some sort of background and context, some considerations, and then recommendations to next steps. And these can really, this could be like a 15-minute meeting presenting a briefing note that where, let's say the vice president of your organization will then decide how to proceed, and this is going to affect the next 1 to 2 years of your work. As an example, that's not, a hard 1 to 2 years, but it's very interesting how in these little 15-minute meetings, or well, not 15-minute meetings, but 15 minutes, let's say, to present a briefing memo, how it can affect things moving forward. Here's a sample briefing memo. They all start off, they have some sort of security levels I find interesting. So I'll explain a little bit more about what that means. But always have, okay, what's meeting group is the memo directed to? What's the subject? What is this memo looking to do? Maybe it's looking for an endorsement. Maybe it's looking for a decision to be made. An endorsement would more be like, all right, we are going to be working on this policy. Let's endorse creating a group to work on this policy. You still provide a background, which is going to include links to references or previous work. There's key considerations like how does this align with our overall vision and the goals of the organization? What people are going to be required to do this work? What are the timelines? What do we need? There's going to be presentations to the VP or director level management. And yeah, you could really easily have decisions that are made here affect the next 6 to 12 months of work, and your next update to a VP might not be for 6 to 12 months later. Then, of course, you get next steps, which are going to be creating your team, coming up with the plan, consulting the stakeholders, that sort of thing. So to actually begin a project, well, we ask, what are we trying to achieve? We've got this briefing note, we've established a team, we create a project map or timeline in terms of reference, all that sort of thing. All of these steps take time. There's a lot of setup to make sure things are done properly and with accountability. And then most of the time you do an environmental scan, seeing what else is out there related to this topic. For me, at least, it's ended up being Googling a lot. This is not always the case, though. Write a summary report of all of this, and then start moving forward with really what we might call the actual work. Of course, all this pre-work is still quite important. General day-to-day for, well, zooming out roughly government, but with my personal notes in mind, you got emails, responding to emails, requests. You generally want your emails to have 24-hour turnaround or less. There's general inboxes that people are responsible for. I was responsible for 2 general inboxes. If you're emailing NSERC, a general inbox to, let's say, get help about the postdoctoral fellowship, for example, most of the time there is one person in charge of that mailbox. You were really just talking to one person. So keep that in mind when you're emailing these government inboxes. You got Microsoft Teams messages and calls, meetings. Sometimes you've got a message from management with a request that requires a quick turnaround, and there's always multiple long-term tasks on the go. All right, I want to talk a little bit about how one might enter the federal public service. Like I said, that does not mean politician. The government is really a hiring machine, and in a good way. You can look this up to get the actual stats. Right now, it's slightly less. It's like about 0.85%, I believe. Again, these numbers are all publicly available of the Canadian population that works as a public servant. All right, this is, well, the government does love pools. This is one sort of thing to keep in mind going into the government, the more difficult aspect, I would say, in terms of learning how to get into the government. And yeah, no, I don't mean these kinds of pools. I mean, well, pools that are going to look a lot less fun. So these are general inventories, basically, of qualified candidates set out by the Public Service Commission. And so you are pre-assessed You apply to a pool. That is sort of a long application process that can really take a year. And that is not even necessarily applying to a specific job. That is saying, I'm qualified for this set of tasks. And then you get put into a box, more on a box in a little bit. But basically, you are trying to qualify into a set of skills. You've been pre-screened, and then you are, if you get accepted into this, you are placed in a pool where now hiring managers can go look at who has qualified, see what they are looking to hire for, and then basically directly pull you out to interview you now that you are pre-qualified. But people can, you can wait in a pool for a week and get a job. You can wait in a pool for a year. So here's what I mean by the box. So you are qualifying for a specific box. So this is a classification level. Each has very specific requirements to meet. You may see specific jobs posted with position numbers, classification levels, talking about if the position is permanent or temporary, what the language profile is. This means written, understood and conversation, basically, in terms of French is what it's specifically talking about. And then how long you'd be qualified for that pool position, because a lot of these times, actually most commonly, when you're applying for a pool qualification, they are term positions these days before getting switched to permanent. So they would have an expiry date. I think the security clearance aspect is interesting. Each job working for the government has some sort of security clearance that you must go through. The most common one, if you look at the bottom right there, is the reliability status, which is dealing with protected A and B information. I'm not going to get into that. That's various levels of personal information. Nothing really revealing, but anything dealing with the government has very well-defined levels of security clearance. It's very careful about not revealing any information about anybody. And so the four levels on the right there, in terms of personnel screening, that is as an individual what you get screened and then qualified for to then be provided, or what level of information you are able to be provided access to, with top secret being the highest. If you are in a top secret position with that sort of security clearance, that means you basically can't talk about what you do to anybody, period. So to understand a little bit about that, what that means, you can look all of these levels up. Protected A, B, and C are dealing with individual information, or information regarding individuals. So I think the language is interesting. It's what could cause injury to individuals, also organizations or governments. Once you get into the secret clearance, like confidential, secret, top secret, that kind of thing, now you're just talking about what's going to cause injury to the national interest. So yeah, it's an interesting choice of words there. I like to get into pay scales. Again, you can look all of this up. So all this information is publicly available. I mean, I know these links aren't clickable, but if you just Google pay scales from the Treasury Board, you can easily find this information. In fact, I couldn't find more updated information than 2025, but here's a sample. In the government, if you remember from that box in the top right, there's something that said ES. There's, I don't know, 50 to 100 codes of types of jobs you are dealing with. The most common one across all government agencies and departments is EC, which technically stands for Economics and Social Science Services. That is really just, you are a general policy analyst. Yeah, my working at NSERC, my title was technically GR, but that's because it was an agency. It had NSERC had its own qualifications, but yeah, you can sort of roughly align them based on matching them from pay scales. But the point is, you've got your entry level jobs. You can see very well set out steps, how they've increased over the years, and how they will increase, assuming you meet your basic performance metrics after your year-end review. You get fixed increases. So EC1, or number one for whatever level you are, would be your entry-level position. You can move into the experienced for EC level. That would be 4. You can see how the pay increases there. And then EC8 is the highest level you can be without being a director. This is still basically being managing a team, but not being in a manager position, which would be an EX qualification. So you can see how these pay scales change as well. So a little bit about my own work at NSERC. So what I was doing can sort of roughly group that into three categories. So I had stakeholder engagement. So some examples of that is I was running a few portfolios related to stakeholder engagement. One of those being NSERC leaders, which is an interesting one. Basically, each organization, mostly universities, but any let's say university for simplicity that is eligible for NSERC funding has the right to have a representative to NSERC, and their job is to come to biannual NSERC meetings. There's online where NSERC disseminates information, and then this individual is supposed to disseminate information basically to the entire university. I can't say anything about if this actually happens, but that is the idea. NSERC and other organizations, they're trying to be as transparent as possible. I'll speak for NSERC. NSERC is trying to have a two-way feedback system as much as possible, since NSERC is directly supporting researchers. Also did the sort of same thing for another committee, specifically the committee that deals with discovery research grants. And I ran the International Year of Basic Sciences for Sustainable Development. That's what IYBSSD stands for. There was a grad student video contest that NSERC ran in 2022, 2023. So I was sort of the main person behind the scenes there. It was a full team. I wasn't doing comms for that, but coming up with the rubric for how the videos were going to be judged, dealing with all the participants, recruiting judges, coming up with a judging scheme, yeah, that sort of thing. So if you knew anybody who entered that competition, I was a main person behind that. Then a lot of policy advancement, focused on two areas: DORA, the Declaration on Research Assessment, which basically says that we need to be more progressive with the way that research is assessed. I encourage everybody to look up the guidelines on the assessment of contributions to research, training, and mentoring. This is basically an information page that NSERC put out 5 or so years ago as a way to really specifically say these are important contributions to research. Publications being one of the list of 10 or 15 items. So this is one thing that DORA says, is that classical journal metrics such as journal impact factor and H-index, in fact, those are not allowed to be used at all, period, in any sort of deliberations about people receiving grants. So I wanted to be more specific, or more progressive, I should say, on fairer metrics. And so NSERC is continuing to advance their policies to try and align with DORA. So I did some work on that. Also, NSERC is trying to do a better job of how to better show the impact of research and how it's presented. So again, science communication, and then did some work in program theory. So learned a lot about this. How do you create monitoring and evaluation plans for a policy? What are its key performance indicators, and how do you know if it's successful? Something about creating the strategy for a policy involves a logic model. So things like this, and yeah, so learned a lot about formal program theory, which is quite interesting. An example, sort of week in the life for me, let's say, all right, some random tasks that I would have had to deal with in a week. Maybe I received an email from my NSERC leaders, or in my NSERC leaders inbox that I was in charge of, saying a new institute is now eligible for NSERC funding. This might be an institute, like a university itself, that has now qualified to go, let's say, beyond like an undergraduate university, and now it's now eligible to take on graduate students and postdocs, and the professors can now apply for NSERC funding. So now they should get an NSERC leader. So now I coordinate with them, basically sending an email to their president on behalf of NSERC and letting them know about the NSERC Leaders Program, encouraging them to select an NSERC leader, inviting them to the meeting, that sort of thing. Coordinate with the NSERC web team to update that on our website once they've chosen somebody, update the official documentation, and that sort of thing. Then we've got a bunch of meetings for planning. The NSERC leaders itself is done jointly with SSHRC, the Social Sciences division of the tri-agencies. The third of the tri-agency being CIHR, the one dealing with health research. So coordinating with them to plan our NSERC leaders meeting. Um, then also would have meetings with like CIHR, the health agency who I just mentioned, because we are then teamed up on Canada's involvement in HFSP, the Human Frontier Science Program, which is an international organization which does some things, including creating fellowships and grants for professors, postdocs. And so Canada has a voting seat on that international organization. Sometimes the NSERC or CIHR or both presidents go in person. We have to respond to these voting sheets. A lot of the time, once you work for an agency like NSERC, you know what NSERC's priorities are. That's part of what it means to work for them and be a policy analyst. So I was writing documents while writing responses to these votes and sort of speaking notes on behalf of Canada. I would write lines like say, Canada says this and this. And so that's sort of how you write things um, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be doing things that are, critical to Canada's security, obviously, but yeah, for HFSP, I could do that. Then also you've always got ongoing projects like a policy project with maybe a deadline 2 weeks away, and then I got to write a report on this environmental scan, for example, for a deadline that's 3 weeks away. And so I want to make some comparisons between policy and research. My own observations, not good or bad. Remote work was certainly heavily preferred in my NSERC life, but now mandates for in-person work are coming back into effect post-COVID. I was still basically when I was working in NSERC, it was 2022, 2023. There was still mostly remote work. People were starting to trickle back into the office, but now, yeah, we are long post-COVID, so it's become mandated to be back in person. There are very strict working hours. You can basically check everybody's working hours. I think everybody has hours between 7 a.m. and 5 p.m., 6 p.m., depending on the agency. You're allowed to set your own 8-hour working schedule between somewhere in those times. So you need to have 8 consecutive hours. And so let's say somebody had set 8 to 4 p.m. 4:01 p.m. hits, their Teams shuts off, the laptop shuts, and you're not going to get a response until the next day. And totally fair. Really good work-life separation. I will say, unless there was some like policy that now you really have to turn around in a 12-hour timeline. For the government, you can't do any work on personal devices. You're sent a laptop, you're sent a phone. There is no longer personal office space. So even the office at NSERC now, there is an NSERC office. There's no specific assigned desks. You go in, you take your desk, you set up for the day, you plug into your workstation, and then maybe you sit somewhere else the next day. I mean, okay, generally people find their spots where they like to sit, but yeah, this is really government is moving away from fixed office spaces for people. Yeah, n'hésitez pas à me répondre dans la langue officielle de votre choix. J'ai pris beaucoup de réunions en français et j'ai essayé de comprendre en français et parle en français aussi. Yeah, my French is not that great, but when you work for the government, you have the right to speak in English or French at any time for all meetings. So there's multiple meetings where some people would just start speaking French because they can. And so you got to do your best to understand on the fly. If you are a manager, you're required to have full fluency in French. My level as a policy analyst, I didn't have to. In order to move one level up, I would have had to. So it's very good practice. French is absolutely critical to advancing in the government too. It's very hierarchical. And so, yeah, vertical decision making. And but lateral movement is common. People want to get different experiences. So to move basically to a position with the same box, but doing different work, working for a different team, that sort of thing is quite common. And importantly, you don't have ownership over your own work. You're doing work, in the zooming out for the government. So for the government of Canada, for the public, it is your work stays on internal government servers for other people to continue on. But when you leave the government, you don't take anything with you like that. So if I like to sort of zoom out and if I my own personal bias, levels of skills that maybe we've received in research versus policy. So programming, obviously quite important in well everywhere in physics at this point. Although maybe that now is becoming talking to an AI to do your programming. But anyways, I the most programming that I ever did at NSERC was writing some Excel code. That's about it. I mean, I didn't even have the ability. We weren't even allowed to like download Python or R onto our computers. You had to be in like a chief data office or something like that to be able to do that. So really, it's yeah, it was all Excel. Um, However, everything is done in the Microsoft Office suite. Everybody using Excel and writing Word documents. Written communication is absolutely critical. Formal policy documents are what you are working on, where in research, okay, of course, we need to be able to explain well with papers, but we do a lot of more visual presentation. Um, which is that point right here. French, like I said, in fact, if you are fluent in French, you get an annual bonus, no matter what your level is. If you're fluent in French, you get something like an $800 annual bonus if you work for the government. So extra incentive in addition to being able to just pay attention to meetings better. Um, yeah, some of these, are to show that, yeah, there are still a lot of similarities. You got to be patient. You got to be resilient. Both times, you could be working in research, you could be working in policy, and your priorities could change or something doesn't work, and then you drop that and move on to a new thing, and you keep pushing through. Always lots of multitasking in both. Networking is critical, still in policy. If you want to move to a different team, then you better know people on that team to be able to move to. However, spreadsheets, yeah, are the name of the game in terms of data analysis for at least my work. And technical skills, this more so, I mean, like working with equipment, like a cryogenic system, for example. Much more important in research. Still lots of long-term planning and foresight, and more of a funny one here, acronyms and jargon. Yeah, rampant in both policy and research. So I'll get through this a little bit more quick because I want to leave time for questions here. If you search jobs.ccgc.ca, you can find a whole bunch of government jobs. Unfortunately, like I mentioned, the program that I was in no longer exists, but there are still programs. If I specifically highlight this recruitment of policy leaders program, this I just took as a screenshot directly from this actually guide for hiring managers on a government website. But there is still a program where they try and pull in people with advanced degrees, masters and PhDs, to move right into a mid-level position in government. So if this is something that interests you, you could think about applying for this for next year. There are a lot of science policy organizations out there. Some ones to highlight evidence for democracy. In fact, the current head of evidence for democracy, Sarah Laffer, she was on my team as a PhD student. So as a sort of part-time PhD student who I was supervising when we were working together at NSERC. And so now she's moved on to do awesome stuff, leading this advocacy science policy organization. Institute on Governance is another good one, and the Canadian Science Policy Center, which I'll say a little bit about. And get involved. CAP has a science policy and advocacy committee. If you're interested, that's one good way to start doing a little bit of science policy that you've probably already done. If you've helped with the organizational structure of your collaboration, or you sit on an EDI committee and write a code of conduct, you're doing science policy. So I'll say a little bit about the Canadian Science Policy Center. You can look this up. They're a nonprofit organization. They run a bunch of free seminars and panels. They host an annual conference in Ottawa with all sorts of policy officials, university reps, government officials, that sort of thing. And so in my sort of final 2 minutes here, I applied for one of these programs now much more recently. So back in, last year, this program called Science Meets Parliament, which is one that they started off actually, yeah, like 6, 7 years ago. This was something that was pushed or supported by Kirsty Duncan, as well as the Raj Chouhan, the Speaker of the BC legislature. And so this is a program basically that's trying to bring scientists and government officials together to just chat, better understand their work, understand how policy affects or how science affects policy, understand how science can better affect policy. And so, yeah, not at all advocacy, and not saying we need more money for science, for example, but a way for scientists to learn about Parliament and to speak to actual parliamentarians. And so I'm lucky enough to get in as a delegate for the BC program this year. So this is from earlier this year for about 4 months from January to April. This is mainly for professors, but also open to postdocs with tri-agency funding. So this is another series of virtual workshops, really sort of reinforcing a lot of what I'd already learned through the Mitacs program. And then it culminates in a or 2-day event in person in the capital city of, well, wherever the program is. So there's currently a federal program, so that would be in Ottawa, and then an Ontario program, so in Toronto, and then a BC program. So we meet in Victoria for that. So my experience with that program, a series of workshops that you see here, a key aspect being elevator pitches. One important thing in terms of science communication, comparing research to the public, or a researcher, let's say, in terms of what's more useful to the public. We like to start off with our background, provide supporting details, then get to the conclusion. Whereas presenting science or communicating policy to the public, bottom line, how does this affect me is the most important thing. And then explain things a little bit more, provide supporting details. But you want to cut to the chase right from the get-go. Think of like your key concluding point from an abstract. That's like the most important thing when you're talking about really how science is affecting the public, or when you're talking to government officials as well. So this did culminate with this 2-day event in Victoria, where we got to, well, have more workshops, but also meet with some MLAs. We had a 1 day in the actual house, the BC legislature, I should say. So we sat in for question period. This is the sheet that we were given. It's pretty interesting. Yeah, you're sort of sitting there. We were like recognized by a whole bunch of the MLAs and the speakers. So people stand up and clap. It's really quite the show. It's yeah, more for show than anything actual useful that comes out of it. But okay, I mean you can watch all these live. They all live stream for each different provincial and federal legislature on YouTube or TV. It's pretty cool though to get the seats, seeing who everybody is, where they all sit. You can't the speaker can't directly refer to anybody by name. They have to say, the honorable representative from Burnaby East or something like that. So pretty cool. My own experience was that often parliamentarians don't have science backgrounds, but they are interested. And remember, they're representatives of their own constituents. So they're interested with that perspective in mind. How can your science affect policy change? But they also, are interested in cool science. I was really lucky to get a one-on-one meeting with Nikki Sharma, who you see here. She's the Attorney General for BC and the Deputy Premier. This was me chatting with her before we actually had our one-on-one meeting. Turns out she just wanted to meet because she was really interested in particle physics and wanted to hear more about particle physics, had questions about AI its use in science, questions about TRIUMF, and it was just a really friendly meeting, just a lot of fun to just really chat. So people are really interested in the science work that we are doing, and yeah, from these 1 minute elevator pitches are critical, or like 30 seconds or 2 seconds. I remember when I was standing at this table right here in the BC legislature, somebody came up because you want to get into the conversation, be a part of that networking, and they had 2 seconds to be like, oh, so what do you do? He started talking for 2 seconds, then got cut off because went back to a different conversation. So really like being able to summarize what you do impactfully and effectively in as short a time as possible is critical. And everybody loves a good photo shoot. Here we are. This was in our hotel conference room. We had one sort of workshop, which was like a panel event, which with the former premier of BC, Christy Clark, which was interesting. And here we are outside the BC legislature, our whole cohort of BC back at the end of April this year. So to conclude, I just want to provide some overall takeaways. Our research is almost always publicly funded, and so I think we have an obligation to explain why it's important to fund, and this should be fun. We should understand how the Canadian government works and other organizations, other international organizations and governments, if it's relevant to your work. We should be paying attention to and reading provincial and federal budgets to understand government priorities as they directly affect us. If you read through the federal budget, for example, you would have directly seen how money is being allocated to the tri-agencies to better fund postdocs and grad students when that new budget came out a couple years ago, which then directly led to increased money for NSERC to improve the amount of money given out for PhD, masters, and postdoc fellowships. We should also advocate for how we think this money should be spent. As we know, CAP, for example, wrote a big letter, always writes a big letter to the federal government on budget recommendations. And I think it's important to do something outside of your research, be that in policy, be that in science communication. We don't want to be just uh, inside our own research all the time. It's good to get involved with other things. Um, and this leads to there being many impactful contributions that go beyond publications, contributions to research specifically. We live in interesting times. The national international research landscape is quickly changing. And so also now as much as ever, I would say that I think we need more people with science backgrounds in government and policy. Yeah, so thanks a lot for listening. The government does not have really cut a lot of funding for sort of team building events in terms of, yeah, we do a lot of things for free, I would these days, but there was still like an annual barbecue for NSERC where we played this little Family Feud game, and so I got asked to be one of the Family Feud people for the NSERC team where we battled against the president and vice presidents of NSERC. So that was fun a few years ago. But yeah, thanks a lot for listening, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. Once again, for everyone who is in the YouTube live stream, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. I'll be monitoring them. If anyone has any questions right now in the Zoom call, feel free to just put your hand up in the Zoom call and we'll get to you and you can ask Ben in person. But I can start off while we wait. So, Ben, question for you, because uh, you did stuff like Mitacs before you went on to do a postdoc at TRIUMF, and I'm curious, what benefits did you find that time in science policy as a policy analyst? How did that affect your work as a postdoc? Because maybe people are interested in going into science policy career-wise, or maybe people are interested to see if it is just a step in their career, but go back into, yeah, something like research and how that could benefit their time as a postdoc or their time in the field of research.
Yeah, great question, Ryan. I would say that in terms of my actual work, one aspect would be that remembering that maybe things don't are not always so critical to be done instantly. I think we feel a lot of pressure to get our work done as fast as possible a lot of the time, get this plot out for the next day. It is often good to slow down a little bit. It's like timelines for these things. Like I would have projects that would be, 2 week, month-long timelines, let's say, and it's like my aspect of that is writing a 2-page document that I could do in a couple hours. I'm like, oh well, I'm done this now. Why don't we just have this meeting already? And it being done at 10 days in advance. Well, everybody else you're working with has different things they're working on as well. And maybe it's good to write something and then come back to it 5 days later and review it and make sure you're happy with it and that it really does address all the priorities. So I think there's a little bit to learn in terms of research there as well. Direct transferable skills, and that it certainly helped with my writing and my science writing as well. And then dealing with things like, let's say, at TRIUMF, understanding how stakeholders work, understanding how to liaise with management. There are many manager positions and directors at TRIUMF who don't have science backgrounds. I sort of that gave me a lot more confidence to work with everybody at TRIUMF and get involved with things at TRIUMF like policy, trying to jump right into getting involved with the structure of the pioneer collaboration, how we were forming things, writing terms of reference and like bylaws for the collaboration. So understanding how those things work formally, there is a lot of overlap, and so then I would be much more confident and often took the lead on doing writings like that as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Is there anyone else with any questions for Ben? Is anyone in the Zoom? Feel free to hop in. Otherwise, I do have one more question. And maybe you can answer this, maybe you can't. But you did talk about several organizations near the end there of your presentation. With one of them, you said a friend of yours who you met working at Mitacs, correct? Was working with these with Evidence for Democracy, correct?
Yeah, someone who was on my team,
Yeah.
the head of evidence for democracy now. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. My question would be, so if maybe people are interested, is this more like with the organizations more partisan, would you say, versus, right, you said like with NSERC, it's nonpartisan, you're a civil servant, but these sound like they're separate organizations. Would that be an option for if someone's has like a policy or specific policies in mind that they want to work towards? Is that something that they would be want to probably go into then instead of going the route of public servant in a sense?
Yeah, so these are all nonpartisan sample science policy organizations. They all have mandates. So, for example, Evidence for Democracy is basically trying to hold the government accountable and advocate for using scientific evidence in policy and understanding how reporting to the public on how evidence, or at least how transparently evidence is used. And so they have a small team, but they hire researchers who are generally people with masters or PhDs in science to do this sort of research. Institute on Governance is so Evidence for Democracy and Canadian Science Policy Center, they're both nonprofit organizations. I am not sure. I believe IOG is as well. That is more an organization that is meant to inform people on how policy and government works, and write some sort of general documents on government and science. Absolutely, these organizations hire from research as well. Keep in mind they are all nonprofits though, and the Canadian Science Policy Center is again trying to make science policy more widely known. Again, advocate for the use of science, but help um, researchers and scientists understand better what it means to do policy and that overlap. So none of these organizations are directly pushing a certain agenda, not partisan. However, somebody like Evidence for Democracy would certainly support and was behind getting increasing the pay for grad students, for example. So it's you can certainly have different agenda items that you want to support, but each of these are still nonpartisan.
All right, awesome, thanks. There is actually one question in the YouTube chat that I think hopefully should be quick to answer, so I'll just quickly share that. So this is from Engineering Getty. During your time at NSERC, what was the longest time frame that the policy folks were thinking about?
Oh, years. Many years. Let's say 10 years roughly. So there's many timescales of components. I can give an example. So now there is being piloted in the last couple years something called the narrative CV. This is the way that you would include your CV or resume as part of a grant application. Some of you, if you've applied to grants in the past, like the master's grant or the postdoc one, luckily the PhD one doesn't have to do this. You have to write the Canadian Common CV, which is a whole very annoying task in itself. In the background, the tri-agencies have been working on a CV where instead of just writing all these sort of bullet items as much as you possibly can, you explain what you've done, explain the impact. Instead of all of the papers you've ever written, you explain the impact of up to five most important papers, or papers or contributions to research, I should say, not just papers. Those are not the only important thing. And so that's been, worked on behind the scenes for many years. There's all sorts of aspects about how that would work in the software behind the scenes. Now it's being piloted, and it's probably, probably in a few years that will become the common CV that's used, but that's still a few years away. So that's time scale of 10 plus years. So yeah, anywhere between a couple of months to 10 to 20 years are all sorts of time scales of things that are being worked on.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ben. With that, I think we're now officially 4 minutes over, so I think this is a good time to start wrapping everything up. Thank you everyone who's joined us for the live stream, whether on Zoom or on YouTube. If you're watching the recording of this, I hope you enjoyed the presentation. And thank you, Ben, for taking your time out of your day to give us this awesome presentation that is something that's very new for a lot of people to listen and hear about in MI, which has been really awesome to be able to experience and listen to. So thanks, Ben.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the invite. Thanks a lot to everybody at McDonald Institute. And yeah, if anybody would like to reach out, just look me up on LinkedIn and shoot me a message there, and I'd be happy to chat more.
Perfect. There we go. And with that, I'll say goodbye, everyone, and we are good.